Hello and welcome to episode 54 of Bits and Pieces, the friendliest cricket podcast that's out there. We have some fantastic news. Apparently, we have gotten more listeners because now we are ending up in the top 4, top 5 cricket podcasts in India. So, a huge round of thanks to all of our listeners, which is mostly family members of Nitin Sundar. We really appreciate this. Please continue listening to it. Download it several times if you can through multiple devices, and hopefully we can like break into the top 4 and the top 5. But today's episode is really special because we have a wonderful guest with us. We have the one and the only Siddharth Vaidyanathan, also known as Sidvee on Twitter, on Cricinfo. Now, usually this is the point where I do an introduction, and there is a long introduction that we do for the guests that we have. But today we are not going to do that, and we're going to do that slightly differently. And the reason why we're not going to do that is because, well, let's face it, all of our listeners know who Sidvee is. And more importantly, Tony is not here, and I'm not trying to match up to Tony's intros. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Sidvee like how we got introduced to Sidvee. And the way how a number of us got introduced to Sidvee was not now, was not before, but was 10 years back. 10 years back, for the kids who are listening to this podcast, was a transitional year for Indian cricket. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to make it up now. It was a great year because an entire generation of Indian cricketers, people who we grew up watching, overnight, over a very quick period of time, retired. And they just went away from our lives, and a new set of people came in. And at that point in time, with our hearts broken, with tremendous uncertainty around, the person we turned to make sense of all of it was the poetry of Sidvee. And Sidvee wrote these phenomenal pieces about all of these players. These stories have been read, reread, shared, read again, wept over. And so today what I did was I went back to 3 of these. And I'm going to take 3 of these, and I'm going to ask 3 of my fellow panel members, because they also reminded me a bit of my panel members as well, to tell us about what they felt and remember about Sidvee and his entire writing to this entire cricket, especially Indian cricket. I'm going to start with this one piece that was written in December 2012. It's called Growing Up with Sachin. And this was the piece that was written when Tendulkar retired from the one-day internationals. I'm going to read 2 paragraphs. Does this mean anything to you? Sachin Tendulkar has retired from one-dayers. Do you feel numb on Sunday morning? Or maybe it was Saturday night in your part of the world. Did the various stages of your life flash in your head as they're supposed to the instant before you die? Do you remember one-dayers 23 years ago? Travel back in time. What do you see? Red leather balls, players in whites, and some one-dayers in England with umpires stopping play for tea. Tendulkar has seen it all. Sometimes he has initiated the change. On other occasions, he has adapted. A master of the game in the mid-90s, a master in 2011. The one constant in a wildly changing format. He was around when one-dayers were blooming. He was also around when they were allegedly dying. You have been around too. Are you a kid from the 80s or the 90s? Or are you a straddler, part of the Tendulkar generation that has 1 feet in both decades? I'm going to introduce Mohan Krishnamurthy because this reminded me a bit of Mohan Krishnamurthy because he is a kid from the 80s and the 90s and the 70s and the 60s. Mohan K was there. He's seen it all. He's seen Tendulkar in whites. He's seen Tendulkar in color. He was there when it took 8 years for Domlore flyover to be built in Bangalore. Mohan Krishnamurthy, tell us your earliest memories and stories of anything that you've read of Siddharth Vaidyanathan, our wonderful guest.
Oh, thank you so much, PGK. That's after that introductions, where do I go? But seriously, I've been following Sidvee blogs and then after that 81 All Out and a whole bunch of other things, his more recent writings and so on. We'll come to that in a minute. And I can see Sidvee very uncomfortably blushing and all that sort of stuff. But we're going to make him blush a little bit more. He's got his hands on his forehead, face palming like anything. But one of the early articles that really drew me to this guy's amazing writing was an article which I think I hope he hasn't forgotten. It was called Tendulkar and the Clutch Question. And this was something that really drew me not merely to the style of writing and the poetry of the writing and the prose, but the deeper questions that he asks in a very gentle way. You can actually thump tables and shout from the rooftops and all that, and make assertions in your writing. But the way he posed those questions in a very gentle but yet provocative way was what drew me to his writing. And since then, I followed that style of writing, and tried to, dare I say it, imbibe it myself. There's a little paragraph that I want to read from that, which is, now here's my theory on this line of criticism, which is about clutch and all that sort of stuff. Had Tendulkar played in an earlier era, these discussions would simply not have come up. Not many dwell on Sunil Gavaskar's clutch moments simply because India weren't expected to win in that era. Now, that itself unpacks a whole bunch of questions. And if you really want to do that, you'll go dig in and find out and explore that particular hypothesis. But yeah, that's my Sidvee introduction, if you like.
Thanks a lot, Mohan. We're going to, of course, hear from Sidvee very soon, but we're going to make him uncomfortable a little bit longer. So, second article that I went back to is actually one of my favorites. It's the one that I have probably read it the most amount of times. It's an article that came out in January 2011, a very dark period in our lives when Rahul Dravid retired from Tests and One Days. And it's an article called Dravid and the Mastery of the Struggle. And the last two paragraphs, seriously, are just so beautiful. Here's how it goes. When I see Dravid bat, I think of our daily lives, the frustrations we endure. I think of how we struggle through the mundane, paying bills, shopping for groceries, standing in long queues, cleaning utensils, vacuuming. I think of how we go through days at work, bogged down by clerical chores, stuck in pointless meetings, often accomplishing tasks that we least enjoy. I think of our silly struggles and how we are often overpowered by them. And then I think of Dravid. Of course, I admire him for his technical expertise, his equanimity, his ability to rescue a side. Of course, I marvel at the way he bats and bats and bats. Of course, I enjoy how he battles a crisis. But most of all, I'm constantly in awe of his mastery of something we all try to run away from, the struggle. Of course, Rahul Dravid is going through a different kind of a struggle right now. But this also reminded me of Nitin Sundar, because when we go through all of our lives and we stuck in pointless meetings, I think of Nitin Sundar in Dubai, walking around, meeting Deepak Chahar in the mall, fighting for money control. And I look at him and I think of the struggles that we go through. So yes, Nitin Sundar, tell us.
That's repressed envy coming through.
So, Nitin, of course, I'm sure you know Sidvee from before at Cricinfo. So please tell us a little bit.
No, actually, Sidvee and me never overlapped at Cricinfo. And I was looking in my Gmail inbox. I think at some point before I joined Cricinfo, I tried to reach out to Sidvee and ask him to try and give me an intro, into the system. I think we had some common friends back then, but I'm not able to find that email, or maybe it never happened. But yeah, Sidvee had already left Cricinfo by the time I joined there. So firstly, I have to say this, right? We are about 15 minutes into the podcast. Sidvee is a man of many words and a podcaster now. And we have faithfully hidden him from the audience. Just like Vikram in Kamal Hassan, only interval block, he will come, Aram Vikalama. So, yeah.
My question is, who am I going to kill? That is the question.
Yeah. So, what do I say? I've not read, I've read this piece, of course, many years back. I just quickly opened it now, and I'm glad that you threw the Dravid piece at me. And I also thought of the analogies with Dravid's current coaching career, the struggling to coach the Indian team and not running away from it. So since we were going to talk to Sidvee now, I went and tried to find, where is Sidvee's writing these days, right? And he used to put everything up on a blog, and it used to come up on Twitter. But now, it's also a sign of our times that there's so much content around us, right? Sidvee himself is doing podcasting now and other stuff. He's not as closely working on cricket anymore. And there's just so much content. At least this is true for me. I don't read as much as I used to in the past. So I just went and landed on Sidvee's website, and I'm going through that index, and I'm like, wow, there are articles here that I have not read. And that feels so I feel a bit, sheepish about it that Sidvee has written and I've actually not read some stuff. So yeah, I just think it's unfortunate that it has gotten down to that. So Sidvee, you need to publicize your pieces more and make sure that all your old fans and readers are still reading you.
No, I actually, I am really happy when I come across a reader who says that they haven't been aware of all these pieces and they like to read it. Because personally, for me, that element of surprise gives me a great joy when I read somebody for, who I haven't read or who I have missed, and I read a piece, and that gives me like tremendous happiness if I like the piece, of course. So I'm glad that there are pieces for you to read now, and hopefully you like them. Yeah.
That's true. No, and also I feel some of these pieces I've probably read before, but there's also so much of cricket happening now that, and you also, I mean, you wrote about Sydney, and then you wrote about the Gabba test. I mean, by the time there's so many highs and there are so many lows, and then there are Sydney's articles. You read them, of course, and then you don't remember them because the next one is coming. The one that stood out for me, right, and I was just going through some of your stuff recently. This was about the Lord's Test, where India won dramatically on the last day after that partnership between Bumrah and Shami. And this is very, very small passage that I really like. A little past 2 p.m., Bumrah got burns. The ball sprung off the pitch, slapped the leading edge, and flew to cover. Most openers hoped to ease into the first over, flicking through the leg side to gather their thoughts at the other end. Bumrah demands split-second decisions. Rock, paper, scissors. Bounce, cut, lift. Forward or back, play or leave, sway out or commit. Hesitation spells trouble. The ball ballooned. Siraj took a dolly. The knock was over even before it began. I mean, I don't even remember the dismissal, to be very honest. Like, Sibley is not a batsman anybody remembers. But just suddenly seeing rock, paper, scissors over there and beautifully sort of, like explaining the challenge of facing up to Bumrah with an analogy that anybody, who's even 5 years old in India would get, who's played rock, paper, scissors. I think that is the mastery of Sidvee. Yeah.
Thank you. But Nitin, you didn't pick the piece where I interviewed you.
Yes. No, yeah, absolutely. No, we should get into that one later also. I think we've spoken about it a couple of times on this podcast, which is the India-Pakistan test match. Actually, we should talk about that, right? The 1999 Chennai test. Because the funniest thing about it, so Sidvee did this long piece, I think, 10 years back, was it? No, 5 years back sometime.
No, it was 20 years after that test. Yeah, so 2019.
2019. Okay, yeah. See, time. Yeah, I really lost all sense of time. That's 4 years back or 3.5 years back. Yeah, so Sidvee did this piece where he spoke to various people who had gone to watch this test match in Chennai. It happened to be the first match that I had watched in the stadium. So I have very fond memories of this match, and I was a school kid back then. It's funny how memory plays tricks with you, right? And the interesting part about that conversation with Sidvee was I was telling him like, oh, Shoaib Akhtar was bowling a brilliant spell that day. He was thundering in from the pavilion and Dravid was all at sea. And then Sidvee is like, dude, I have the scorecard. Shoaib Akhtar did not play that test match. I'm like, what? What are you saying? So yeah, that's clearly, I'm not my memory is not the best chronicler of events. Let it be said on this podcast.
The number of people who said that they've been at that match.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. That must have been the easiest piece to write because now everybody was like at the test match. So it is fine.
Knowledgeable Chennai crowd is fully there.
That's why I tried to ask, where were you sitting? Yeah. When, what view did you have and also to get a bit of evidence also.
Do you have the ticket with you? Can you show me the ticket?
I have anecdotes that never happened in the match. I'm like throwing stuff out, yeah.
Gaurav Sundaraman, actually, I asked him if he could talk to me about the match. He said, I don't remember anything, but I have the ticket. I'll send it to you.
Nice. Yeah. All right. In true bits and pieces fashion, our intro is going on and on, but I will end it with this. And this was, I'm going to end it with this piece that's written by Sidvee in August 2012. It's called Goodbye VVS. 2 paragraphs. Obviously reminds me a lot of our next panelist as well. And I'm just going to read this out. Maybe others can spot it as well. Lakshman was that backbencher. He was also the nicest backbencher. The word nice is so overused that it's lost its meaning. But VVS was nice, uber nice. So nice that for a long time in his career, he found it hard to refuse interviews. Rarely have I seen anyone so anguished at having to say the word no. He was apologetic when he couldn't go the extra yard to help. He was so pliant that it was often worked against him, like in his early years when he was shunted up and down the batting career. I once asked him whether all this niceness had worked against him. He considered the question. Then he spoke about how he couldn't think of behaving in any other way. That's the way I've been brought up, he said. I have to be nice to people, not because I have to be nice, but because that's the way I am. It's not wrong to be a nice guy, right? Abhishek Chopper knows. Is it wrong to be a nice guy? Tell us a little bit about.
No, I mean, such a pleasure to finally have Sidvee on the podcast. And I don't know whether that's an introduction to Sidvee or some reference to something else, because I mean, the one thing that has stood out for me, when it comes to Siddharth Vaidyanathan is just how nice he is. I know a number of people who have reached out to him, people who have random ambitions of writing about cricket who have reached out to him, and he's always given them great advice. The pieces he has edited on Cricinfo, the pieces he has written on Cricinfo, he'll tell you about what his thought process was when he was writing them, and all the writing, obviously brilliant quality of writing, on one side, but what stands out for me is his humility. So yeah, I mean, Siddhartha in that sense is very, very special. My favorite piece about that Siddharth wrote on Cricinfo, and I've told him about this earlier too, is about David Murray, the West Indian wicketkeeper who passed away sadly in November of 2022. Was a member of the rebel side that went to South Africa in the early 1980s, and then they were absolutely thrown away from all forms of cricket in the West Indies. And there's an article he wrote about David Murray, which is called "Staying Alive." Has mention of what David Murray did when he came to India, when the West Indies team were depleted due to Packers World Series cricket. And this is the last paragraph. With his financial resources drying up, Murray's future looks bleak. Locals say he spends his days at the beach, making a living out of helping tourists get stuff. Murray's version is slightly different. I go to the beach, enjoy myself, and stay alive. It doesn't really matter who's right. Here's a man Michael Holding felt was the best keeper who had kept to him. Someone who could have been a legend. And here he is now, scoffed at as a pariah by the kids of Bridgetown. Neil Young was probably right. It's better to burn out than to fade away. So yeah, I mean, it's one thing to write about the Dravids and the Lakshmans and the Tendulkars of the world, but Sidvee's cricketing oeuvre, as to say, goes far, far beyond all of that, and some of the stuff that's not really in fashion, he's written about that too. So yeah, I mean, just grateful to have him writing on cricket and all of us getting to read it.
Thank you, especially for mentioning that piece. I mean, that was a piece that was very hard to write, because to see a cricketer in that state, I mean, to see anybody in that state is not fun. And he actually took me to his house. It was a very dilapidated building, and many of you might have seen Breaking Bad. It was like one of the Jesse Pinkman's kind of rooms where he makes his stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's not easy to meet a person like that, talk about it. He didn't even want to talk too much about his career. He occasionally brought it up, and then he would want to talk about. He would say, "That's all past. It's the present." So it's hard to do the story. He also wanted money for the story, and that can get dicey at times. So I gave him a nominal amount, and I also mentioned that in the piece, I think, or I told told Cricinfo that I'd paid him. And anyway, so very hard to write, very hard to go through. And at the end of the day, you went to play cricket. Sure, there was a lot of politics involved, but then to get banned and to get ostracized and to have your whole life taken away from you, I mean, it wasn't like he killed anyone, right? He made a bad choice as a youngster, and that something you need to pay for the rest of your life. So yeah, that was hard to write. It's a short piece. I wish I could have written more, but sometimes you can't go too deep into it as well.
Yeah. There's also The Unforgiven, which is about the entire tour, I guess.
Oh yeah, the whole team. Yeah. Anyway, thank you all of you for being so generous and embarrassing me completely. So I don't know how I'm going to top this, by the way. So
that is what happens with our intros all the time.
They're usually the best part of the podcast. But thanks a lot for coming in. And I just thought we'll just start off because honestly, these are the stories that all of us remember. Like, you see, we didn't speak about this before we started this podcast. We just started, and all of us have like, oh, there is that Sidvee article that we sort of remember, and we're just picking it up and saying, yeah, this is what we remember. So talk to us a little bit about the process of writing this. Either it is around, say, I know it's a very big question, but maybe it is at the end of someone's career. Maybe we can start with something like that, where when a career ends and you look back and you're trying to basically tell that story of what it means to a certain set of people, which, by the way, I hope you're practicing, because you need to do that in the next 2-3 years as well, I think. But talk to us about that process. How do you basically like do that, and what goes through your mind?
I don't know if there is a process as such, but one thing I can definitely mention is one of my favorite things to read, though this may sound a bit morbid, but I think, and I would recommend everybody to read it, is the obituary sections of various newspapers and magazines. And, this started when I was very young as well. I mean, the Hindu used to publish, a lot of these obituaries, and they also used to publish obituaries from the past. They used to
This
say,
day, that
50
age.
years back, this person died and all that. I really like the Economist magazine has that every week they do an obituary. They do a masterful job of it. There is this writer called Anew who writes most of it, and it's so brilliantly done. I mean, to encapsulate like a whole life in 800 words takes a lot. I mean, you have to do a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of empathy more than anything, because irrespective of the fact is this person is dead, and you have to find a way to encapsulate that. So that's amazing. The New York Times, of course, has some wonderful ones. The London Times has. So I'm a big fan of obituaries. So I read a lot of them. I like writers who do them well. And maybe this comes from that love, maybe because ultimately what I mean, the player is not dying per se, but their career is pretty much over. So that's what you're trying to sum up. And yeah, I mean, when it came to all these players that you spoke about in 2012 and even before that, in fact, I wrote a piece in 2008, which was the start of all this. This was when Saurav Ganguly and Anil Kumble retired. And I wrote that piece, which basically began a slew of these retirement pieces. And basically, it's like I was part of that generation. I mean, I grew up watching them. For me, they were my first experience of cricket, and Sachin, of course, started it, and then all these players. So I think it's important to have that connection too. So now I will, of course, I could write pieces about all these cricketers who will be retiring at some point, but I think the pieces that will resonate more are those who have actually grown up seeing Kohli and all these other players play, because there is, when you're 12, 13, 14, the connection that you form with these players, you can't match it when you're 30 or later. So yeah, that makes a difference.
So are you saying that you're going to now make TikTok videos of all of these people who are retiring now?
I mean,
of the times.
you have Chat GPT, man. It'll just write it. You don't need anyone to write it. You have the AI writing these things now.
No, actually, so Sidvee, sorry to jump in. I had a question. You were probably one of those first people from, very, very different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, to go into cricket journalism out of passion, right? And I think a lot of people then followed suit, including myself at one stage in my life. And now there are so many people at Cricinfo, at Crickbuzz, and multiple other outlets, even at Star Sports and all. Like, so even the media has changed now, but there are so many people who have gotten into cricket journalism, seeing that that's what they really want to do. What was it that motivated you to blow that furrow? Also, at a time when the internet itself was in its infancy, right? And you really started off as an internet journalist, not so much as a print journalist, I think.
Yeah. I mean, again, I've said this story many times. It was purely luck. Cricinfo happened to have a vacancy that time. I had just finished my engineering. I wrote a few pieces to them because this Wisdom Asia magazine used to ask readers to write in whatever they wanted, right? And so I just randomly liked writing about cricket. So I wrote some stuff about, I even forgot what I wrote. But it so happened that fortunately this editor, Sambit Bal, continues to be the editor, got back to me and said, these pieces are interesting. You seem to have interest. What do you do? I said, basically, I'm doing nothing now. I mean, I didn't even imagine that a full-time job in cricket was possible for someone like me. I mean, I didn't realize. I mean, I'm an engineer who's basically, confused in life. And I had no idea that, I could actually do something. I thought, you had a separate path to take to do stuff like that and all. And so it so happened that even without meeting me, he asked me to write a couple of more pieces. There was some India-New Zealand series happening then, 2003, right? That most boring series ever that happened.
Boring is not the right
where,
word to use, but yeah.
whatever. Mark Richardson, a legend. Mark Richardson his legend is built on that series, basically. And so he said, can you watch a day's play, or it was a tour game. Can you watch a day's play and write a report? So I watched it and wrote the report, and he offered me a job even without meeting me. And then, in fact, I made a trip to Mumbai to do a recce of Cricinfo and to basically figure out this is not some guys rolling up joints every day or something like that. So Sambit basically introduced me to everyone there and said, this guy has come to basically recce us and see if we are okay to work with.
Typical.
So yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
No, this
no,
story I remember. But the question was like, how did you make that that switch? And I'm sure family would have had questions. You yourself would have had a lot of questions.
Yeah.
In your mind,
I was
doubts.
lucky. Man.
Bank account would have had the biggest questions, but okay,
Absolutely.
continue.
Bank account did. In fact, I had a job in hand. I probably even started working for a bit in a banking software company. Yeah, I was like starting my training period and all that. So I thought, I'll do banking. So I'll work in banking software for 1 year, 2 years, then do an MBA. Be one of those typical PGK type of guys who writes for Ken after some time.
Brilliant.
The
Shots
attack.
played.
Sorry.
No reason.
Shots fired.
has happened.
This is the Vikram part. You said about the killing. The killing has started.
First kill.
Joking. But yeah, I mean, see, the thing is, my dad is a retired professor from IIM. So for me, I somehow thought that MBA is going to be only a but obvious choice for me, and I thought I'll do that. But anyway, so of course, financially, it took a big drop, and there were elderly people. I remember my college friend, his grandmom. She was like flabbergasted. And she said this in Kannada, of course, but then she always identified me as that guy who quit a good job and went and did some silly sports writing or something like that. Always. She never referred to me in any other way. So that happened. But also, see, I was lucky. I was lucky that, I didn't have to really earn and support, people around me or my parents or anything at that time. My parents were financially independent. I didn't, I could take that risk. So I think, I told myself, okay, if I don't do it at 22, I'm never going to do it. Took that risk. And I said, worst case, what can happen? Worst case, after 1 year, I say this was a bad decision. Yeah. I do an MBA and again be PGK and write for Ken or something like that. So yeah. So now I think you're fully dead. So yeah.
That's for the long introduction, BGK.
See, listen, I've plugged Ken twice. Okay, so thank you.
Well done. Yes.
Sure. Thank you.
Anyway, so yeah, I was lucky. I don't think it was a big risk. And again, it was not a decision that I said, oh, I'm going to do this for all my life and I'm going to be this cricket writer, sports writer. It was such a liberating feeling to even get a chance to do something like that. I mean, imagine, having to watch cricket, the very thought of having to watch cricket and write about it. And of course, I was extremely lucky that I was along with me, I was working along people who were really exceptional and who took their work very seriously and who were fantastic cricket writers. And to just spend those 5 years there and learn from the quality of, Rahul Bhattacharya, Sambit, Amit Verma was there at that time. Samant Subramaniam worked for a short while. I mean, all of them have gone on to, write books and do great things. So to be in that environment was a big plus.
Amazing.
Can I go back to Sidvee? Can I go back to the obituary reference that you made? Sure. And it's really it struck me as really something superbly interesting. And I want to ask you a little bit about your style of writing. So when you write obituaries, it's you got to be kind to the person that you're writing about, and you got to be complete as well in the narrative. 800 words, you have to write an entire life story, and sometimes you can't help yourself but be completely prosaic and completely warm and pleasurable, and use adjectives that lift rather than actually say anything that might harm the image that you leave with the reader, right? How in your writing, how do you go about, being, if you like, well-rounded, balanced, and not just be, cotton wool, the entire narrative, if you like.
Sidvee will demonstrate this for us now with an obituary for PGK, who has already killed a couple of times.
This is something that's really. I was curious about the process that you used for writing, and the fact that you mentioned obituary struck me as a very, very nice chord over there. So I'd like to explore that a little bit with you, if possible.
Yeah, I think, it's important to, at the end of a player's career, I think it's important to recognize, the monumental aspect of it. I mean, especially people who have played for so long and who have done so much. It's very important to understand that, first of all, what they've done is great. Okay, we can question whether he should have scored 3 runs in this match or 5 runs in this match. But ultimately you want the big picture here.
Or declared when someone was 194. Or
exactly. You can argue about all that, forever. But the fact is that, number one, they were one of the 11 best cricketers for India for a long, long, long time, and perhaps some of the best cricketers in the world has ever seen. I mean, when you're writing summing up Tendulkar's career or Dravid's career, I mean, these are players who will be remembered for 100 years, 200 years. So that is one aspect of it, to just give it a big picture call, and also at the same time try and pick out, some highlights through anecdotes or some personal experiences, something that people would not necessarily immediately remember, but when told, then they would be like, they can spend 1 hour talking about it. So try and find those moments. Now, instead of saying that, talking about his 100 in Sydney, maybe you can pick out that one moment, that one shot where, he did something specific, and then you tell somebody about that, and then they'll just go on for an hour about it. So those kinds of little things that you try and start a conversation, and that's pretty much what you do. And then after that, of course, you let it follow whatever you've started.
I'm going to anchor this a little bit on the last innings that Rahul Dravid played, which I think was in Cardiff as a one day. And you ended that piece by saying, "Now I can go back to staring at the ceiling," or something like that, right? And this basically says, I'm just going to be bored that Dravid is retired, and I'm just going to go back to. And that was a beautiful way to round off that piece.
Oh, literally, for 15 years you were watching the wall. After that, you watched the ceiling.
No, I think it was that ceiling bit was. I was basically trying to say that how when something really irritates you and you have no way of expressing it, you're just staring at the ceiling and wondering how is the best way to put it. And then I wrote that piece, and then at the end of it, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, let me then figure it out again. Kind of. That was maybe the sentiment. I don't know what I was thinking then. Of course, yeah.
I just want to jump back to this. So we spoke about the early part of when you joined Cricinfo and your decisions leading up to it. And of course, now we are going back and forth between this and the obituaries, which probably came out between 2011, 2008 onwards is when you said. Talk about that intervening.
We are calling them obituaries, and they were actually pieces killed.
Fine. Retirement pieces.
I think it's fine. I think it's fine because I think players die twice. Players die first time when they stop playing, and then they finally die. So, like a Richie Beno, for instance, he died 3 times. He died when he stopped playing, he died when he stopped commentating, and then he died. So, at least for fans, for us, I mean, if a player stops playing, then what do we have? Then we have either a spectacle that we want to that we rarely enjoy, or a commentary. Oh my God.
Which we rarely enjoy. Which we rarely enjoy.
Which we rarely enjoy. So there are very, very few players who have the same effect on us post-retirement as they did when they played. Very few.
Is there anyone that we can think of? Just throwing it to the panel.
I mean,
who
the one who
get into cricket media really? Yeah.
No, I think Beno definitely.
Tendulkar also. You can say a lot of things about Tendulkar. I mean, of course, he's very silent. He does not get involved in anything. But he has never come into the limelight post.
No, I mean people whose reputation has continued to sort of, at least, obviously it's not going to get burnished after they retire, but people who didn't come into cricket media and are still sort of looked at fondly.
I'm going to say Javagal Srinath, but PGK won't like it.
No,
Why?
Why?
No, not about PGK. This is because we were on a podcast earlier with two people from Pakistan. So it was Pakistan and Indian cricket.
So that reference.
And they were essentially asking, we think Javagal Srinath, don't you think it's a little overrated? I'm like, really? You're talking about Javagal Srinath? Don't you have a lot of other things to talk about? So that's
and Wasim Akram wrote in his book that Javagal Srinath was a better fast bowler than Kapil Dev.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
that was one of the money lines in the book. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm like, and the best part is it just goes on. Like there's no,
he doesn't wait to say it.
On this moment. It's like, I'm like, Gideon, hey, hello. You need to stop here, boss. The whole of Bangalore and Mysore is waiting for you to ask a few more questions.
But never mind, we'll name a circle after Javagal Srinath as well now.
Rotator cuff circle.
But I just want to go back to that period, Sidvee, just after you joined Cricinfo and before. And I think you've alluded to this in a couple of your interviews and conversations. But talk to us about that, the thing where you come into cricket as a journalist. So you're not just sitting on desk and writing. You're obviously traveling. You're going to press this thing. You must have done interviews as well. And this was probably the early stage this is a peak stage where people were still talking to the media. There was still some amount of interaction, etc. And I think by the end of it ended it started to go in very different paths. So I just because you are that person who has seen both of these. So just tell us a little bit about cricket's and cricketers' relationship with the media and how that made you and affected what you were doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the greatest luck that I had was when I joined. Of course, initially I was in the desk for a few months, but then I was then soon assigned to cover domestic cricket. And, I would often go to the Wankhede Stadium, and then they're all free entry and everything. I mean, even now, I think you can just walk in. But you can go to the press box, and you're a nobody. But then you are actually sitting alongside people who have covered the game for 20, 30 years and watching like Mumbai play a Ranji game against Gujarat or something. And to actually travel around Mumbai, travel around India to watch. And many times, when sometimes Cricinfo didn't have a budget even to, send me to these games. I said, it's fine. I mean, I'll take a train and go, or I'll fund my trip. That's fine. And then you can always find ways to stay with other journalists, and you can figure that out. But, I did that actually once when I went to Chandigarh for the first time to watch a Duleep Trophy final or something. And then I basically didn't end up paying much at all. In fact, I even got an offer to somebody, a guy, basically a good friend of mine said, do you want a bill from a hotel? I can get you a bill if you want to submit it or something. I said, no, I won't get there so far. So, but, it was amazing. And access, domestic cricketers that time. And even now, I think to a large extent, they want to talk to you. They love to talk to you. And you can sit with them. Like in the Wankhede, like after a day's play, all these Mumbai players would come and they would just be sitting in the sidelines. You just go chat with them, players of the stature of Amol Muzumdar, Sairaj Bautule, very, very, very good players. Yeah. And they would chat with you. They would be happy to talk to you for 15, 20 minutes after a day's play about the game. And of course, they would want to focus on the game. I mean, they don't want to focus on controversy and this and that. But if you talk to them about cricket, they are more than happy to talk to you about it. And just learning those things from them at that early stage in my career was a huge deal. And then you meet all sorts of people, you meet commentators. There was this great commentator, Suresh Saraya, radio commentator, pioneering Hindi radio commentator. Apparently, all the many old timers. I don't know, Mohan, if you
English too, and absolutely, yeah,
English
I'm
too.
Old timer, yeah, go.
No, I mean, I am too. But people, remember that
border number 2. By the end, all of
it is just the beginning. No, basically, Suresh Saraya, very interesting. And apparently he had this distinctive Gujarati twang. when he
Yep.
spoke.
Yeah.
So he always, it was never long on. It was liang on. People remember that, all this
Yeah.
distinctive. And Suresh Saraya had these ties. Whenever he went on a tour, he would get a tie from that tour because boards often came up with commemorative ties for each tour. So he would
Wow.
wear a tie every time he used to come to the ground. He would wear a different tie, and he often came to Ranji games just to watch because they didn't have any radio
I
commentary.
mean,
He would
sorry,
just come
the
to watch.
irony of a radio commentator wearing ties that nobody can see is not lost on me,
Mhm.
but you can
When there is no
continue.
radio commentary. When there
Yeah.
is no radio commentary. So, but Suresh Saraya for a 9:30 start, Suresh Saraya used to be at the ground at 8:30. Even if he was not covering the game, there was no radio commentary, he would be there at 8:30. And then you go there, I would also like try and go early because Suresh Saraya is there. Why not go early and talk to him? And the kind of stories he would tell you, the things you would learn from him. And he would say, all these journalists, many of these journalists used to come just on time. Some used to come late. And that used to really irritate him. He's like, here they're being paid to cover this game. This is their job. How dare they come late? And then he would say, you come early. And then he would tell me, he would go speak to the groundsman, go speak to this Mali. They will tell you some things. And you actually learn so much from people that you speak to. And Suresh Saraya, I remember talking about him. There was one story that he said, which I'll never forget. He said there was this test match in Calcutta during that Packer depleted West Indies series, which David Murray came on. And he said this Calcutta crowd, this match was becoming really tense. And there's this West Indies player, Siu Shivnarayan, no relation to Shivnarayan Chandapal, by the way, who was trying to stay there battling for a draw. And the light was dimming. So he said, the light was dimming and all the crowd's getting agitated for more wickets. I think India needed 2 wickets or something like that to wrap up the test. And he said, you will not. And then the umpires are meeting to see if they have to go off. And he said there was this moment when, this Eden Gardens crowd in Calcutta had this signature thing of lighting up the newspaper torches,
Exactly.
Yeah.
which they often used to do in the past. And then they end the whole stadium like it's ablaze. The
Crazy.
whole stadium lit up newspaper torches so that they could be more
They could
light
see it.
for the Indian team to force a victory. And he said,
Oh,
I have
incredible.
never seen the kind of, I could never even imagine that this could happen. And he's like, the light is dimming, but this crowd has created this light and India is trying to win. And he's like, those are the kind of
Wow.
things that you remember. Yeah, that's just amazing. Yeah.
I was vaguely reminded of the Happy Dent ad. But yeah. But yeah, amazing that this happened.
Yeah. Suresh Saraya also was the commentator who was on air. I think it was probably him and Harsha Bogle who were on air when India played the test in South Africa in 1992,
Okay.
when after South
The
Africa's
first-
first test at home after
Right.
readmission. And Suresh Saraya said, just seeing the atmosphere there, seeing the joy that the people had to see cricket come back. He said, I called the first ball and there were tears in my eyes. He said, I could not resist. What a momentous occasion this was on,
Amazing.
for cricket to actually come back. And of course, the very first ball that cricket came back, Kapil Dev got Jimmy Cook out. Jimmy Cook, who had waited for like 20 plus years to
20
play
years.
test cricket in South Africa, got out the very first ball. And Suresh Saraya is crying in the commentary box because he cannot believe the momentousness of the occasion.
Wearing a tie.
Wearing a tie.
Actually, Harsha Bogle also has talked about Suresh Saraya's preparation and so on. In fact, in an interview on Australian TV, he talks about preparation and so on, and he talks about some commentators that he learned from, and doesn't mention Saraya by name, but also Richie Beno and Ian Chappell and so on, that he learns a lot from. So the fact that you allude to that preparation that he used to do so carefully, and he comes from an era. I mean, obviously, Raju Bharatan and Suresh Saraya and Dicky
Anand
Ratnakar,
Setalvad.
Anand Setalvad, and all
Yeah.
those people, right? They created the kind, or at least charted the pathway for many of people like you to follow. But you started your career around 2000 or so, right? 2000, 2001.
2003.
2003.
2003.
I
Yeah.
thought it was more 2001 too, but India was just coming out of that really crazy match fixing thing, and we didn't know where things would go and stuff like that. And you were entering this era as a journalist. How did family react to all of this? I know you alluded to the fact that your parents were well off and all that sort of stuff, or at least could look after themselves and so on. So, but how did family react to your choice, if you like? And
It helped that my family had very little idea of cricket. So if you, in fact, seriously, apart from my grandfather, who
Yeah.
was a huge influence on me, who was a cricket lover and, a genuine cricket connoisseur, if there was any, he's the kind of person who, who would like actually take notes when watching cricket
Nice.
on TV. Just and that time when you didn't even know whether you were watching the match or whether you were watching some
Grades.
reptiles running across the field or something like that. So, but he was a genuine cricket lover. But other than that, my mom and dad actually, for them, they didn't care too much about cricket. For them, it was like quite a trivial thing and didn't take much interest. And I don't think the fixing aspect came in at all. The only thing they were concerned about is, and of course, the money was not that much, and nobody in our family had actually been in a journalist or in the media space. Everybody was either teacher or banker or one of the several professions that you have. So they were a little uncertain about how this would work because for them it's a whole new thing. And do you need do you need a godfather in this kind of industry? And can what is the progress like? Where where is the next level? When do you write an exam and when do you clear? When do you get distinction and centum and all? What is this? What is happening? So yeah, they didn't have an idea of the ladder, so to say, and it was all new, as you said. The internet was hardly, the penetration was hardly there, and cricket on the internet was still very, very new. Cricinfo and Rediff were probably the two main places that you had that time. And nobody knew. And even me, like I was hired for the website. So my real love was the magazine. I was really hoping that I could write for the magazine, but I was hired for the website. And my first 6 months, I had no idea that the kind of things I learned, I had no idea before. Like I was doing ball by ball commentary for many games. I was doing scoring and commentary at that time. I was writing reports, and I was writing like 4 reports. So you would write a pre-toss report, a toss report, a lunch, tea, all that. You write quite a few reports, and then you write all these pieces. You interview cricketers. It was quite a rush for me, and I wasn't earning that much, and I was living in a really small place, sharing with a few people. I mean, initially, I was in a PG in Mumbai. And then I was in a small place where I was sharing with 3 other people, but none of that mattered at that time. It's like you were in a space where you could actually watch and learn and speak to players, write stories, see your name coming up in a website, in a magazine. I started writing also for the magazine after a point. It was quite thrilling to do that. And I mean, I didn't even give a thought at that time, where is all this going to go? Because just being there in the present was so exciting.
Yeah.
Nice.
And you moved on. Go on.
Yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. Sorry. I was just going to say, talk us through that journey. So basically, you finished you spoke about doing the domestic thing, all very fun, interesting. And I'm sure at some point you started doing international tours. And did you start attending press conferences? Just talk us through
2004 Bangalore. Michael Clarke's debut was also my debut as a covering the match. This was and it was quite torture, actually, so to speak, because Sambit was also at the game. Sambit, who is like the editor-in-chief of Cricinfo. Then there was another journalist from Cricinfo also at the game. And it was me. So the 3 of us at the game, and both of them were senior to me. So first of all, there was this thing of, okay, I'm here now making my debut, but then I have 2 people looking over my shoulder. And then, there was also just I was there writing like session reports, as we spoke about, the lunch report, tea report, and the end of day. And it was hard because in a game, when you're actually there, so much is going on, right? It's not when you're at the TV and watching, that's it. That's your focus. But at a game, you have everything else going on. You're trying to focus on things. You're trying to keep notes, keep idea of the score, then watch the replays because you can't really often see the LBWs and things like that. So you have to look at the TV screen. Then you have some other journalists chatting with you. Yeah, so much happening. So it was quite an initiation. But I started doing that. I went to my first international trip was.
In fact, one question, Sidvee, since you spoke about Clarke's debut, and we can cut this out if it's not relevant. But in the next test match that happened in Chennai, I remember there is one long form Cricinfo piece where a couple of journalists spoke to Sehwag about his century.
Yeah.
Were you one of them? I don't remember
No.
exactly.
That was Chandrahas Chaudhary and
Chandrahas.
Nishant Arora.
Yeah.
Nishant knew Sehwag really well, so Chandrahas got to do it. Yeah, that's a magnificent piece.
Yes.
I mean, it's timeless, stands out even to this day. And it's amazing how Sehwag, talks so finely about that innings and this whole notion of see ball, hit ball and all. He's like throws out of the window. He's like
so
he
much
thought
thinking.
a lot about the game. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing
So, but
piece.
that back then,
Make that
Cricinfo for home series, they didn't let people do the whole series. So I just did that test. So they used to divide. Different people used to go to different tests. So I just did the Bangalore test of that series. But I also did, before the Bangalore test, there was also a tour game that they played at CCI. The Australian team played at CCI. And that was also an amazing match to go to and cover because, you actually saw like in CCI, the view is a little more intimate than at the Chinnaswamy. So you can actually see like when Glenn McGrath bowls there at the CCI, it was quite an amazing thing for me to actually see McGrath live. I mean, I'd seen him when I was from the stands, but to see him from the press box view was quite amazing. Then my first tour was the end of 2005, 2006, actually, early 2006 to Pakistan. That famous tour where basically 2 test matches went there, but played 600, played 500, and then finally Asif and Kamran Akmal won the final test for them in Karachi when Irfan Pathan took a hat trick in the very first over.
Correct.
So that was my first tour, and I couldn't have even dreamt it. I mean, where am I going to even imagine that I will be in a position to go to Pakistan to cover a series and to watch India play Pakistan, to go to all these great venues, historic venues, meet these people, eat the Pakistani food. I'm like, dude, I covered a match. You won't believe. I covered a match in Peshawar on that tour. And I really don't know how many more matches have been held in international matches have been held in Peshawar after that, because after that Peshawar became like the Northwest Frontier Zone, right? With with all the terrorism there, and that was an unimaginable situation where you had like a stadium. I don't know the capacity of the stadium, but like 3x of the number of people were outside that stadium trying to get in. There were like people who were, what the stuff they were doing, in these apartment buildings in India, if there are some old people living on, say, the 7th floor or 8th floor, and there's a sabziwala below, they find a way to get it up, right? Yeah, with the bucket. Yeah. There were people trying to get humans from a bucket up there into the stadium, like taking these big buckets and trying to pull them up over there like that.
There are Instagram reels of cats. You would use cats to pull them like that, but this is like crazy.
Cats. But humans are trying to get into the stadium by using such techniques. And I'm standing there and I'm like, what is going on here anyway? What? And it was amazing. And the kind of things that you see in Peshawar, we actually, you won't believe, Osman Samiuddin, who is was covering the series for Pakistan, he himself had not been to Peshawar before. Because in Pakistan itself, people from Karachi and Lahore don't necessarily travel to all parts of the country. I mean, it's like India, right? Just because you're Indian, it doesn't mean, people are like, oh, okay, I went to, Tibet and it was so, boss, I only haven't gone to Tibet, boss. You were happy that you went there. So, so basically, Osman Samiuddin and me, we're taking a walk in Peshawar just after the day's play, just figuring out what's happening in this place and all. We go into a market. This absolutely stunning market, and I basically wanted some dry fruits because somebody had told me that dry fruits are amazing in that part of the country. And he said, if you can take it back. So we went to this place, asked we said, where's the dry fruits place? He said, which dry fruits place? And so we said, okay, what do you mean, which dry fruits? There are 5 dry fruits place, 5 dry fruits market. Which one you want to go to? He said, boss, we don't know. I want a packet of dry fruits. That's all. So we went, we got it. They figured out, obviously, the Pakistanis quickly figure out that you're not a Pakistani, especially me with my Hindi and the terrible Urdu and all. So they said, okay, free. India, free. Take it, go. No charge, nothing. You are our guest. All free. Cab guys are giving us free rides and everything. But then when we went to that market, suddenly we're just walking down. We just see like a whole row of stalls for swords and guns. And we're like, what the hell is going on here? Are these toys? And no, they're not toys. They're like the real stuff. like Kalashnikovs and all. Like we can say basically pick it up
Whoa!
and go if we want. And
Free,
we are
free,
like,
free.
you have buy one get one free. And
This
Osman's
reminds
like,
me.
dude, this is like Osman is like, dude, this is bad shit, man. What is happening over here?
This actually reminds me a lot of Pundits in Pakistan, which Rahul
Yeah.
Bhattacharya's great book, which was about the
Yeah.
previous
Great
tour,
book.
if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
Yes,
That
yes.
India went there. From a cricketing standpoint, is there anything interesting that you saw in Pakistan, or some players? Were there some players that were like they had a lot of affection for? Like the previous tour, I think it was Balaji.
Balaji,
It was this
yeah.
tour, it was the one previous
Yeah,
tour.
yeah, Balaji,
Is there
Balaji.
other interesting things that you saw in the press conferences, in the players?
They were
etc.?
huge fans
Dhoni,
of Sehwag.
right?
Sehwag. Dhoni had just started. Dhoni too,
Yeah.
actually. Because
Dhoni
Dhoni
that
had a
tour,
great
yeah.
That
Musharraf,
1-day
100
series
against
and
Shoaib,
that
yeah.
Correct.
Faisalabad 100.
And Musharraf
They-
told him not to cut his hair and all of that.
Not to cut his hair and all.
Yeah.
And that time, that was also the time when that whole Ganguly Chapel saga was happening.
Yes.
And so all the Pakistanis were into it. They were like, they wanted every bit of gossip about
They
that,
wanted
because
tea,
for them it was
tea.
like, yeah. They loved it. And for them, that's all these angles that come in, and they actually loved. I found a lot of them really loved Saurav. They felt that here's this guy who's actually standing up to the the
Greg Chappell.
Anglo,
White guy.
not just Greg Chappell, even the Anglo bloc, right? I mean, all these lords shirt waving and this and that. They actually really liked that bit about him, and they were not understanding why these Indians were falling for this silly guy who's coming from Australia. What is this? Who's this guy? Just send him away. What is this? And also, there was one camp there who was like, but more than anything, for them, it was like reality TV going on, and they wanted to know. They're like, what is happening? Yes, why exactly is this happening? And also, I ended up speaking to a lot of them through that. But yeah, I mean, I think generally also the Pakistani media was vastly different from the Indian media at that time. For them, they would just gang up on the captain. I mean, in 2003,
that still
Inzamam got
happens.
ganged up on.
Akram's
Yeah.
book, man, like every 3 pages of Akram's book is about one new faction that, okay, Amir Sohail and this guy and that guy got together and got the media, and then suddenly I'm out of the team
Yeah.
again.
In fact,
Every
you
3
spoke
pages.
about.
Crazy.
You spoke about Rahul Bhattacharya's Pandits from Pakistan. In that, one of the most hilarious bits is how throughout the tour, every single all these press conferences, everyone was asking Injamam, why isn't Fazle Akbar playing? Why isn't Fazle Akbar playing? Fazle Akbar, who was like a domestic legend and all. Finally, Fazle Akbar plays in Rawalpindi and just gets hammered all over.
Come on.
Rahul Dravid scores 270 and all.
Fizzle
And then,
Akbar. Yeah.
Fizzle. And then he comes to the press conference. Inzamam comes to the press conference, and these media guys, why did Fazle Akbar play? Why did Fazle Akbar play? And Inzamam, in that typical style, says, "आप लोगों ने ही select किया उसने, अब आप लोगों ने ही drop कर रहे हैं."
Wasn't that series where Bob
That run
Bulmer
out
was
also
coach?
happened. Yeah.
Bulmer was coach of Pakistan, wasn't he?
In the tour I was there, I think.
I think he had just
possibly.
started that tour, right?
Probably.
And then he ended
because
up, of course,
Miandad
in
was the
2007.
coach
Miandad
on the
was the
earlier
previous
tour.
one. Yeah.
Correct.
Bulmer was the coach. Yes, you're right.
Yes.
And he just
But I'm
started
really-
that. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struck by, because you also mentioned Greg Chappell, that particular saga, and because it's actually very interesting, apart from just the Pakistani media part, because I don't think Indian cricket has seen a reality kind of a situation since then. Probably not before, probably not since, because even recently we were talking, we were saying that, even now in the Indian team, it looks like it has become much more professional. Probably many people don't like each other, but they're like, look, this is just like an office. This is just like anything else. We are here to do one job. And it's okay if we don't hang out later. It's okay if we don't do some stuff. So that professionalism has sort of, like, at least at the national team level, has sort of seeped in. So I imagine that you were there in this part, in this turning point where you probably wanted to write about cricket. You probably wanted to do all of it. But I imagine there was a lot of pressure from everywhere around you as well. Like, what's going on? Get this story, get this gossip. And did that make you uncomfortable? Was that a part of did that contribute to a certain amount of disillusionment about access journalism, etc.?
The access bit, it's for sure, because what happens is with the access, initially it's a high. It's like, you're in this circle where you're getting so much information every day. You can talk to players are telling you things off the record. Journalists are telling you things that they have heard from players. And then you have, you're reading things and then you're verifying. There's a lot of excitement there. But after a point, it does get to you. You're like, this is not the
Mm.
point why I decided to do this in the first place.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And luckily for me at that stage, still the pressure hadn't reached the levels that it did eventually about, getting these for the clicks and for the TRPs and all. It hadn't
Mm.
reached that. I mean, if that
Mm.
situation were to happen now, I mean, nobody's going to be talking about cricket. This is the only thing that people are going to be talking about.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
luckily, Cricinfo, for them it was like always like write a comment piece, like a big picture, what is happening. You don't have to
Mm.
really reveal all the things that you've heard, but you have to
Mm.
make sense of what is going on.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so that time I wrote a few of these big picture pieces. But
Mm.
yeah, it does. That was like quite an exhausting episode altogether because
Hmm.
it became so polarized. So you are hearing like a whole set of stories from the Ganguly camp. These players who are leaking stories from that side, and then you're hearing another set of stories from the Chapel camp, and you're like, who he
Yeah.
said, she said, how are you going to make
Correct.
sense of it? Each one has only one dimension. They don't have the whole story, and then you are expected to put it all together. It got too much. So in a way,
Mm.
it was important. It was an important period, and I think the main thing about that is it was the first big televised drama. Right before that, I'm sure
Yeah.
Gavaskar and Kapil Dev and all. There was a lot of drama
Correct.
that was there, but
Correct.
the
Yeah.
television was not that big a deal. And you
Yeah.
have Greg
Correct.
Chappell going to Calcutta and then showing the finger to the fans and all. That's
Oh,
just
amazing.
Yeah,
TV.
I forgot
That's
about
made for
that.
TV, right? You have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Completely
he
forgot
said he
about
had an
that.
Let's
injury and all. Something and all he said later.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. Oh God.
all this happened. Yeah.
let's
10
just
wicket defeat in Calcutta. Yeah.
Sidvi, if you don't mind, we can fast forward to today and go back to that period because what you touched upon is really, really important in the context of today's cricket journalism, right? And you mentioned TRPs, you mentioned clicks and click-throughs, access and difficulty with access, and lack of verification when you write stuff, and therefore an environment where conspiracy theories abound, and that's essentially what sells stuff, right? So if you fast forward to today and look at the whole media space and so on, without going into too much detail, would you? I mean, what's your sense of what's actually happening, and how as readers, people should sift through and make choices that are actually guided by appropriateness and guided by source verification and all that sort of stuff. Just your thoughts on, especially Indian cricket media today.
Yeah, I don't really envy them. The people who do that on a daily basis, I have a lot of admiration that they are able to, still keep their senses in this. It's hard. I mean, you have the people, the TV channels are just going on a different, they're berserk on their own
Correct.
space. And
Correct.
so and obviously everyone has to like there ends up being like everyone gets into the slipstream because it's
It's a
hard
circus.
to it's a circus. You have
Yeah.
to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So eventually, Cricinfo and other, so-called serious publications may not be as sensational and as thing, but they will also have to get
Right.
cover these things in their own way, whether it's on Instagram or whether it's on their whatever forum that they have. They may not do it with the same brazenness that a
Correct.
TV channel does, but they will still have to do it. They cannot ignore it. And the other
Mm.
thing is that when I was, back then in the mid 2000s, the players actually cared for the print media because they
Mm.
needed them. An
Correct.
interview in for them, access to Cricinfo or access to Times of India, Indian Express, it mattered a lot. And to be
Mm.
to have a good relationship with a journalist who worked for these places was important. Greg
Mm.
Chappell used to often, I mean, this is something that everyone knows. It's an open secret. He used to
Mm.
have these editors in these top publications on dial,
Mm.
and he would call them and he would talk off the record to them and things like that. And I mean, it's okay, he's the coach of the Indian team, he can do what he wants, but the fact is they mattered to him. Now
Yeah.
I don't
Mm.
think the print media really matters to anybody. I mean, each one
Mm.
has their own forum with millions of followers. They can make the narrative. They don't care about Sidvee writing a comment piece that shapes the narrative. They can find ways to do it. I mean, Ashwin has a YouTube channel that he's updating even after end of day's play, man. I'm like, dude, you just bowled like quite a long spell. You want to take a break or something, or what? You're just recording video. I mean, that's the state we're in. Players are now in control of the narrative, and they feel that okay. I mean, so I think that is actually good in a way for anyone taking the game seriously, because then they don't have to really rush through and find these quotes and find these access. I mean, you can actually sit back and write like the big picture. You can write the thing, but where again that comes down to economics, right? Whether you want that big picture that will have 500 people reading, or you want that little snippet which will go viral. So that's the choice people make.
And while this entire transition was, of course, happening at that point in time, of course, you also spoke to a lot of cricketers. Of course, there's one thing how journalists and cricket journalists, the journey that they had to adjust to, and they had to figure out, oh, this is this new world that you're figuring out. I'm sure when cricketers are like, okay, there's something going on. So I'm sure you must have like done some interesting interviews, done some this thing. I mean, if you don't want to take names, that's perfectly fine. But is there some perspective from the cricketing side that you basically listened to, and some story that you can share with us? Or that era, what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, see, basically, you're saying in terms of how the players valued the media, you're saying?
It could be the value of the media, or how the players' lives themselves are changing. Because the 2000s are an era where players are also going from, oh, wow, the money, the IPL is starting to come in. So you have all of these big changes that have suddenly become massive public figures. So this entire adjusting with fame and the microscope and travel, and suddenly things are changing. So players who behaved in a certain way by the beginning of 2000 or the late 90s are now behaving in a completely different way by the end of like 2000s. So I'm sure there must
first,
be some...
First IPL mentioned, PGK, you're going to get a self-sledge from the team.
I think one of the things that was I was fortunate to again be at was the very first ICL. I don't know how many of you remember the ICL.
Of course we remember.
The league that should not be
Tau Devilal Stadium.
Tau Devilal Stadium. I remember that, and I was at the very first game, and I also saw quite a lot of games in that ICL, and I interviewed a lot of players about why they had chosen to do this, even though they knew that there was a big risk of them never playing cricket again. I mean, the BCCI pretty much banned them immediately, and they couldn't even enter like their own clubs. That's how much the ban went. And it was very interesting to have those forthright opinions at that time, and people talking about the fact that there are only so many people who can play for India, and now we have this financial opportunity, and we have decided to take it. And even as the ICL was going on, many of the players were in touch with their teammates from other Ranji teams and things, and they were debating whether they should also join or whether they should not join and all that. And it was quite a interesting time. It showed you how the opportunities for cricket and money making were so few for many people that you got a chance like this and you took it. And of course, the IPL came along after that, and things changed, to a different level altogether. But that was one thing. The other thing was that, in terms of players, I used to interview a lot of players at the domestic level, and they were happy to speak because they want that even like for them just to have like one interview or one thing in Cricinfo was a big deal, because you must remember a lot of them back then used to play league cricket in England in the summer. They used to go, they wouldn't get county contracts, but they would get league contracts. So for them, that was part of getting that league contract, because they can say, here's my interview in Cricinfo, here's my thing, here's my reports from Cricinfo and all that.
Nice.
So for them, Cricinfo was very important. But then some of them, I don't want to take names, but the moment they made it to the Indian team, they wouldn't reply to you. They wouldn't pick up your call. I'm like, dude, we spoke like 2 months ago, man. What is this? I mean, I'm totally fine with you saying you're busy, you have a lot of things going on, you have no, you can't do it at the moment. We'll find a better time. All that is fine. They would just, that's it.
Ghost you.
There'd be radio silence. They ghost you. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But then eventually, you also know that it's a cycle, right? I mean, at some point, you'll probably be dropped, and then where? So, but that.
Hey, Sidvee, how are you now?
Hey, sorry, man. I changed my number. I mean, it's a famous. I mean, of course, that doesn't apply now because the players don't need the media now. But there's that famous line that apparently a very, very senior veteran journalist told Shrikant when he was acting, Chris Shrikant, when he was acting very haughty and this and all that. And he said, boss, 20 years after your cricket career ends also, I'm going to be a journalist. So why are you worrying? So apparently, I mean, that was the times that they lived in. And, back then, journalists could influence selection. Selectors took journalists and journalist writing very seriously.
So they could
And there are times in which they would call them and say, between this player and this player, who should I pick? That's the level of influence they had.
Also because they were really shaping public opinion also back then, right? And you don't want to end up doing things that the public sees as a bad selection call, right? So selectors are also beholden to do what, which has changed now, right? You're right.
Absolutely. In fact, I've had senior. No, I've seen, very senior journalists, respected journalists boasting about it quite openly, saying that, it was thanks to me that he got selected and all. And it's a bit of vanity there, but it shows the importance.
It's interesting you use the word respected.
You are right.
Exactly.
You are right.
Respected journalist was what Saha used to describe Yupu.
But this is all fantastic. I think we are, since this is not a podcast that goes on for 7 hours, we want to just quickly do two other things.
Unlike other podcasts featuring ex-cricket people.
Boom.
Sidvee, I just had one question. I mean, every journalist who's worked in the industry for as long as you have and as extensively as you have has like a funny story of this the match report having like two endings or like two narratives, and depending on how things end, you then decide the final piece, and sometimes it's a big confusion right till the end. So any such match that you can talk about either at the domestic level or international level?
There are quite a few. I mean, any close match, right? When you're writing the match report, irrespective of whether you're in the stadium or whether in the TV, so you have two alternative these things, and you have XXX for the scores, right? For everything. And that XXX has also been published sometimes on Cricket by mistake. So scored XXX and all that will be there. So there have been, I mean, you have to have two paragraphs, like, when you suppose, like, it's especially when you get to the last 5 overs, when you know that things are going to be close, you start you basically write the rest of the report just as that would stay. But the first 2 paras or first 3 paras, you would have 2 options, or sometimes 3 options if you want to include a tie in there.
All
but
3 results.
All 3 results possible.
All 4 results.
All 4
results. Yeah. But I didn't go that far. But in a test, you often have to write for. I remember, Antigua in 2006. India basically needed 1 wicket. And West Indies were holding on. Fidel Edwards and maybe that other guys.
Jerome Taylor.
Either Jerome Taylor or Collymore.
Collymore,
I think I forgot. But that was a match I clearly remember. I had 3 because you had win for either side and draw. A tie, I didn't go. I mean, a tie was not going to happen that day.
West Indies didn't have a chance to win that, no? I thought only India was forcing for the win. It was either India win or a draw.
Then it was either there were only 2, but I'm sure there were days in which I had 3 where both there was probably a test. But that test, now talking about that test, what was extremely interesting about that test in the end was, and it was a moment I'll never forget, is how the Antigua Recreation Ground, I think that was the last match at the Antigua Recreation Ground before things shifted to the Vivian Richards Stadium. And the Antigua Recreation Ground sits adjacent to the prison. The Antigua prison, the main prison in Antigua, and where Vivian Richards' dad worked for many years. And in fact, it was because he worked there that Richards used to come with him every day, and then he used to come to the stadium and watch games and all that. So that was a big connection. He was like a warden there or something. So the thing with that ground is that on the one boundary edge, right, that one wall, you actually have a few gaps in that wall where you can watch from the prison side. You can watch the game from the prison side. So towards the end of the game, as things got really tense, there was a West Indian journalist who pointed out and said, every time in the ARG there's a close match, you have to look there. And you had all the prisoners looking through those gaps and watching the match and figuring it out. That's such a brilliant sight to see at the end of a thrilling cricket match.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Nice. In India, our cricket stadiums are the prison, but okay.
I mean, you even have the
Yeah,
even
this is not
have the
allowed. This is
bar.
not allowed to
Enclosure,
tattoo all
yeah.
of this. Okay.
Yeah, the enclosures.
And
Enclosures.
moat as well sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah.
This is all fantastic. Thanks a lot for the city. But I think we have to now get to two things that your recent stuff that you're working on. One is, and of course, both of them are called the same thing, 81 All Out, and you have two parts. There is a podcast and there is also the publishing house. But I think I would love to start with the podcast because I think the podcast is something that is quite interesting. Tell us a bit about the podcast because it feels like it's one of those podcasts that is just with friends, a little bit like this. You're all getting together, more serious analysis than this nonsense that we do. But still, it's still like a bunch of friends getting together, and I can feel, and it's a podcast that I genuinely listen to quite regularly because I like the vibe. It's just something that sort of like grows on you, and there is a certain chemistry between all of you. So tell us a bit about the podcast. Is there some? I don't think there's a grander, big ambition. I think you're just doing it for fun, and I think that's just such a wonderful thing. Just talk to us a bit about the podcast itself.
Yeah, it's just fun, and it started off as a mail exchange. Mahesh and I used to exchange. Myself used to exchange a lot of emails. Mahesh, who is Mahesh Sethuraman, yeah, he's a big cricket fan. We used to, for years, we've been exchanging a lot of emails. I mean, sometimes I would write something, and he would take severe disagreement, and he would send me a long email, or he would put a comment on the Sidvee blogs. In fact, many people used to come to read Mahesh's comments and not the blog itself. They would be like, Mahesh, why haven't you commented on it now yet? And I would be like, dude, you first read the article. Anyway, so Mahesh used to often send, and then eventually at some point we said, anyway, we are emailing each other and all, might as well just put this email up on a public forum. So it started as a blog of email exchanges.
I remember
And
that.
then at some point of time, it moved on into a podcast. And we said, okay, let's experiment anyway. It's the text is something, and now we'll be doing it on a thing. And podcast started, and it started because we also chatted with the other banana podcast guys, and Ashoka AB Van was also interested. So it started with that. And then Kartikeya started coming in whenever we wanted some expert opinion, and so it ended up being the four of us. I don't know. I mean, many people may or may not agree with the expert bit, but I mean, it's great to have the different styles, the different voices. That's the regular crew, and of course, I get journalists and writers and other people related to cricket to come on every once in a while. I think the event at some point of time, as we did it, we realized that we want to straddle that gap between too serious and too frivolous. So just like a coffee shop chatting cricket, you're chatting in a relaxed way, but at the same time you're very serious about it. You're not just you're not just randomly faffing. You want to have that serious vibe, but you also want to make it a little more relaxed, and occasionally you troll someone or you banter, and all that comes in. Because at that time we felt that you either had
AB Van is most of the time
to...
AB Van is most of the time trolling Date.
Yeah, that has become a thing. But now he's almost becoming like Date, which is very worrying now. He's agreeing with everything Date is saying. I'm like, dude, at least you should hold out before the whole world starts agreeing with Date. Anyway, so that's pretty much it. And it's just, the good thing about the podcast, unlike a piece, I mean, it's both a good thing and a bad thing, is that it doesn't take as much time to do as it would take me to do a piece. And so, if when I'm watching games, sometimes I'm just like noting down things, or we're just messaging in that 81 All Out group, just messaging thoughts and this and that. So things just flow. But if I were writing a piece, I would actually have to spend that little bit more time to, structure the piece. Then writing the piece itself will take time. And also, in a way, it's good. Doesn't take that much time. But of course, it's a podcast, so it's people listen to it and it's forgotten, unlike a piece which many of you have read and they are talking about even after 10, 15 years. So there are pluses and minuses to it. So
That's very interesting, and because it came up, and then it's now carved a space for itself in the cricket media space, if you like, at a time when there wasn't really much by way of Indian cricket podcasts, if you like. We had a bit of Subhash's
Subhash, of course, couch talks,
talk and all
much
that
before
sort of
us.
stuff.
Yeah,
of course. But then and then a few other bits and pieces. Well, bits and pieces. We came after you guys.
What I said,
a few other bits and pieces like that. But then nothing serious. So this then come in as something that people do listen to and take it sort of semi-seriously as well.
Yeah, in fact, Subhash also had a role to play. I mean, early on, he was on the podcast quite often
Yeah.
when he had the time. The 2019 World Cup. He was even, in fact, the host of some podcast shows where I couldn't be there. So he also played a part in kickstarting the whole thing too. Yeah.
Yes.
Before you
Yeah,
talk
I think-
about the publishing arm
Yes.
of 81 All Out, right? There are, and PGK will also agree with this story. So there are two things that are very weird listings on Amazon. Okay. One of them in India is this Aquafina bottle. If you search for, I don't know if they still have it. There was one Aquafina bottle that was selling for 11,000 rupees in India, right? This was like 3 years back. Like very strange, and it went viral and all. People posted screenshots. Like, what the hell is this? It gets imported from somewhere from China. One bottle of water will come or something. So with shipping and everything, 11,000. The other weird thing was War Minus the Shooting. If you wanted to get a legal copy of that book, it was only selling on Amazon for some ridiculous sum of money, 24,000 rupees or something, right? And I remember I saw this, shit, I want to read this book. I found some illegal PDF somewhere of the book, which I then sent into my Kindle and I read it. And then PGK was looking for the same book. I don't worry, I have PDF, I will send you. Both of us read the PDF, right? And this was, of course, before 81 All Out started publishing books. And of course, the first of those was War Minus the Shooting. Firstly, thank you so much for taking the effort to bring some of these books back into the limelight, such wonderful pieces of writing. And tell us about 81 All Out Publishing.
So interesting, you spoke about that pirated PDF that you picked up and sent around, right? We ourselves used a pirated PDF because Penguin had lost the manuscript.
Lost the original.
Penguin
must have been the same PDF.
Same PDF. And imagine that PDF, you would have seen all the words either were joined. It's very hard to read. It's not easy to read. So we had to actually, first of all, find a way to get it into a Word doc and then individually, read it closely enough to clean it up. So that itself took a lot of time.
It would have.
But again, it was purely luck. I mean, in fact, you spoke about that Amazon listing, right? So we did a podcast to commemorate 25 years of that 1996 World Cup with Fidel and Sharda. And after the podcast, the price of that went up by 50%. Like it was already at some 10,000 or something.
One fellow is like, who's buying that book? That's one fellow.
It's probably Amazon
Like,
algorithm. Like, searches have gone up. Let's increase the price.
Search pricing.
So it went up. And then, for me personally, it was like it had a profound effect on me when I read it back in 2003. In fact, that I read it when pretty much in the first 6 months of joining Cricinfo, because I found it on Sambit Bal's office shelf. I'd never found that book before. I'd heard of it, but I'd never found it. So I picked it up from Sambit Bal's office shelf and said, can I borrow it? And I borrowed it, read it in like a few days. And I thought I knew a lot about that World Cup. And then I read Marquesi and I'm like, I perhaps didn't know anything.
I mean, that's the beauty of that book, because it's like, it's about something that you know very clearly, as opposed to like a lot of other cricket books are about, it's about older stuff. It's about the West Indies cricket, or it's about corner of foreign field. So all of that. But this is about something that you remember very vividly. And once you've read this book, you can never see it the same way ever again. And that's
you can't, right?
Transforms.
Yeah. And basically, so there is this book. And so I, thankfully, thanks to Sharda, I got in touch with Mike's partner. Mike's not, no more, but his partner's alive. And I got in touch with her and I said, listen, we've done this podcast. And she's a big fan of Sharda's and friend of Sharda's. And she said, oh, okay, I'd love to hear the podcast and all. And then she wrote back very, a touching message saying, I love the podcast. It was so nice to hear about the book. And Mike could have been so happy. In fact, he was very angry when the book came out that it hardly got much traction and it probably sold very few copies and all that. So then I said, it's 25 years since the World Cup and Penguin still have the rights. So would you look at asking them to republish it? And she said, yeah, great idea. And she did. But they said they're not interested. And so, it leaves you a little helpless because there's a great book out there, which, but nobody's willing to publish. And then the only way to read it is through a pirated PDF. How ridiculous is that? So on a whim, I mean, Mahesh and myself had been talking for a while about, these old cricket books and where do you get them? How do you, what do you do? I mean, why are these books out of print? Why is nobody the same? So I think all that came back to me at that time. And I just said, I would be happy to publish it. And, then apparently Sharda told me later that she wrote an email to her and said, "Who's this guy? Is he trustworthy? What is this? What is going on?" And Sharda was, thankfully put in a good word and all that. And Liz then decided that, yeah, okay, let's talk about how we go about it. And the only way I could think about was, okay, we already had this podcast, 81 All Out. So why not create like a company called 81 All Out Publishing, which would then go on to not just publish this book, but even try and
Amazing.
bring
Yeah.
back other books.
Cricket
And
Beyond the
we'll-
Bazaar
Cricket
as
Beyond the
well.
Bazaar
Cricket
is
Beyond the
the next
Bazaar
book.
is the second book, and we're now coming out to the third one. We'll keep it as a surprise
Yay.
soon. So, and hopefully few more as it goes along. And just more than anything, I mean, now you actually, people like us on the outside actually have the ability to, publish these things on Amazon, Kindle
Yeah.
Direct Publishing, print on demand. You have so many ways in which you can do it. I mean, back
Yeah.
in the 80s and 90s, you
There was nothing
couldn't
you
break
could do.
through
Yeah.
into this. And we are not doing it for, as for profit or something. This is purely a passion project, and whatever comes in as money is bonus, and we can use it to publish our next venture. So that's pretty much what we are doing.
Superb stuff. Yeah.
Nice. Sidvee,
Yeah,
just
and
one.
actually, I must say, and I must mention here that
Sorry.
publishing Mike Marquesi and that book actually gave us a lot of, a sort of a push with other writers and other publishers who started taking us seriously. They said, "Oh, okay, they've
Mm.
published Mike Marquesi's War Minus the Shooting. Okay, they must be serious about what they're doing."
Yeah.
And so that helped us get to Mike Coward, which then helped us get to the next few authors. And so they gave us that credibility, which is extremely important in this kind of field.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Sidvee, just last one question from me, probably getting back to your writing, which has obviously fascinated all of us. When you started, you were obviously writing for a publication, and you must have, grown up reading a particular kind of, analysis or whatever. And as they say now, the eye test kind of articles. And now, any article you read on, let's say, Cricinfo by Monga or KK, or you'll have control percentage and so many runs scored like this through offside and leg side, etc. Do you think your way of watching a match, even if you're watching just as a casual fan, so to speak, or with the intent of writing about that match later on a blog or for some publication, do you think your way of watching the match and then writing about the match has also undergone a change? Is it like a conscious change you've brought about, or is it just the influence of reading whatever you've read? Some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's I've tried to, you change. I mean, I definitely, as you go along, people change the way they write, they read more, the other influences come in, and you want to, ultimately you want to become better. I mean, see, one of the best things that I had when I was in Cricinfo for those 5 years with all these wonderful writers around me giving me the feedback, and each one of us would read our pieces and give each other feedback. One of the great things that happened then was nobody was praising the other, saying, "Oh, great piece," or anything like that. It was always a way to try and get better. It was always like, oh, okay, it's good. I mean, they would of course give you that reassurance saying it's a good piece, but then they would also point out the things that you could change and things you could think about. So that you do. I mean, even now, like there are very, very few pieces that I go back to now. You guys were kind enough to read all these pieces, but if I were to actually go and read some of these pieces, I would find things that I can change, and which
always.
actually makes me pretty happy, because it means I've grown and I've improved.
Yeah.
And I don't want to read a piece and say, "Oh, I'm perfectly happy with it," because that means that, oh, okay, well, what, the 10 years have passed and you're still perfectly happy with it. What is this? So yeah, that is there. But the one thing I feel that I've tried to maintain throughout, and it's actually moving out of Cricinfo, that one of the things that I could explore and really try to make the most of was to explore the whole feeling of watching a match or watching a player, or
Yes.
Yeah.
that's something that's very hard to do when you're in mainstream journalism, because at the end of the day, there's only so much self-indulgence that you want to give, right? And there's these cardinal rules in some places that say don't bring the word I, and don't reference yourself. Nobody cares for you and all. That's all fine. But in a personal space, in a blog, or in a space where, which is much more intimate, I felt I could actually explore those bits of it, which is extremely important. I mean, yes, all these data and all the analysis is all great. And I love reading the pieces by Monga and KK and everyone else who writes some wonderful. I think
Yeah.
the bar is really high for cricket
Yeah.
writing. But I wish that I could also read like a similar number of pieces on what people feel about when they watch the game, and where
Yeah.
there are so many phases in games, the moments in games, when you have the highs and the lows, a game. And when a game goes, the graph of the emotion is quite intense. You have, and that is important for a writer to bring out. It's the amplitude of the emotion that the piece has to reflect. It's not just about, when you read a piece, actually, if you can actually bring out the rhythm of the game and the
Mhm.
rhythm of the tension,
Yeah.
that is good writing for me. I mean, if that actually you can relive the game not just in terms of the description, but also in terms of the rhythm. And so by the time, like, I mean, one of the pieces I'm really proud of doing is that piece where I interviewed Nitin about the Chennai test in 99, where, by speaking to these fans, you actually, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get their memories, but you're actually trying to get the memories of their feeling. And so you're
Yeah.
trying to see how much hopes they had invested in that match and how magnificent that Tendulkar innings was to watch and how magnificent that Pakistani team was, and the hopes and the dread. And oh my God, if he gets out, we have lost. But then he's not getting out. He's scoring fantastically. You have to bring that out because
Yeah.
that is ultimately what you watch for, right? I mean, that is what you want to remember, and that is what you want to hold on to, and that is actually what gets you into the game in the first place. That's what
The
you love.
emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Nice.
emotions, right? I mean, that's why
Yeah.
you want to, that's why you get hooked. You get hooked to the game forever, and that game is the sort of the hook. So all that is important in cricket writing, and I don't think we see much of that now. I wish we could see more of that. I think part of the reason is economics. I think there are enough writers who would be willing to explore this aspect of it. But you have the whole internet, and where you read, you will have people just writing these pieces. You have Choppy also writing once in a while, and I think it's good. It's good to
Yeah.
have this space where people can actually explore the personal side of the game, and for things to resonate with fans. And people may not read it. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
saying like thousands and millions of people may not read it, but 10 people reading it and feeling the
Yeah.
value of it is itself enough. Yeah, I think.
Lovely.
100 true friends. Yeah.
I have one question. So, I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I hate to draw curtains on this, and PGK will wave the wand, to say, we're ending it or whatever. But what I'd like to do is to, it's been very anecdotal and very experiential, if you like. We've sort of dug into your experiences of writing and seeing and observing and writing poetry on it, but to a bit of self-reflection, perhaps, just to end. And I go to a piece that you wrote, called "A Letter to the 18-Year-Old Me," I think it was. And there's a really nice passage over there, and I wanted to write such a letter for a long time, right? So there's the passage at the end where you say something like, and you quote Neil Gaiman, I think, in that, saying that you go through life feeling inadequate at sometimes, powerful at times, but then Neil Gaiman says you are the only you. And that's something that's been an anchor for you as you've done your writing and exploring as well. And because there are things that only you can find it, do them as well as you can. Now, if you reflect back as a 28-year-old or 32-year-old or whatever you are, what is it?
Mohan, this is a high compliment. What is this? I'm the other side of 40, boss.
Okay. But what is it? What is it that you found? If you can share that, that'll be really good as a self-reflection.
No, I think there's throughout, there's always been the most challenging bit for me to write anything was the feeling of inadequacy. I'm like, first of all, you have, if you just go into a library or if you go into a bookstore, you have all these great writers who have written books and published books. Then you read them and you see such marvelous writing, such wonderful writing. And like, what am I going to add? Why should I write anything? when, all these people have written so much, even with the cricket writing, when I started out with, all these
Yeah.
people you read in the magazine, you had, I used to really look up to many of the writers I work with. I mean, Rahul Bhattacharya is now a very good friend of mine, but, his writing, when he wrote a piece, it was like I wanted to be the first one to read it. That's how much I loved his writing. So, yeah, I mean, you felt that there's not much that you could add. And I'm sure there are many people who feel that way. Like, suppose, some people used to, say that, when Sachin retired or Dravid retired, they said, you have now written the piece and there's nothing more to add. So, and that is a feeling I went through many times in my career too. But then eventually you realize that there are things that only you can say, even ultimately. I mean, that it may not be content, but it may
Yeah.
be the way you write it. It may be the style you use, the words you use. And you always, one thing that I never struck me when I started writing, but I read it somewhere. I forgot who said it. I must remember. It's like when you write a sentence, that is the first time that those group of words have been put together in a sentence.
Mhm.
So value that. Value
Yeah.
that. Make the sentence better, but
Brilliant.
also value the fact that you have been original already. And
Amazing.
so that is something that you need to keep as something to drive you forward. It's like, okay, I'm already original. And so I need to make my originality better. I need to make that better. But it doesn't mean nobody else has written this sentence before. And nobody else has written the sentence that this will eventually become before. So I think that can be one thing that all people starting out writing or feeling inadequate with writing can always remember. And then once you have things on the page, then it can only get better.
On that note, Sidvee, since you spoke about the sentence and being the first person to write it, a bit of current affairs. KL Rahul and Akshar Patel are going to miss the squad because they are getting married. Now, can you put this sentence? Can you frame this sentence for us? Because people are struggling. How do you frame this sentence? So please help us as the cricket writer.
Without obviously saying that they're getting married
Getting
to
married
each
to
other.
each other. Yeah.
No, it goes without saying. But yeah.
No, but that is where they're struggling.
How would you frame the first line of this? It's not easy to frame the first line of this. Like, yeah.
On the
Yeah,
spot. On the spot.
You put me on the spot. And also for me, I need to see things on the page to even figure out. Like I'm an editor, full-time boss. So I need to figure out how it looks on the page.
What a cop out. Okay, others, anybody have a
No. I'll just end with one last thing that I'll ask Sidvee, which is
Tell no. How will you frame this? There is a way to frame the sentence, surely. Come on, there must be somewhere.
I'm not going to do it. This is an audio podcast. We're not going to do this here. But
Akshar Patel and who's the other guy? KL Rahul. Akshar Patel and KL Rahul to miss the New Zealand ODI side. Akshar Patel and KL Rahul to miss
in
the
the
New Zealand
recently
ODIs.
concluded
Because they are going to be busy with their respective weddings.
Yes.
There.
Yeah, respective is a good word to use in there.
I
Yeah.
think we got to say
I get the
something like,
prize. Chalo.
apropos.
Apropos, wedding apropos.
This has
Okay.
been such a wonderful conversation. I'll just end with one last thing, which is just your analysis hat. Border Gavaskar Trophy predictions.
Oh, see, my predictions means I will always get it wrong. And these days I've decided that it's best to hedge and say 2-2. So 2-2.
That's enough. We're in the WTC.
Listeners of 81 All Out will know that every single prediction I've made is wrong, I think. So it doesn't.
And those
really...
guys come
so
back
2-2...
and troll you also for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So 2-2 will also be wrong. Don't worry. But I will hedge.
All right. Fair enough. But
Super.
yeah, such a wonderful conversation. Thanks a lot, Sidvee, for appearing on this. We loved the stories. We loved the entire journey that you went through. And we look forward to more writings, more book publishing, more podcasts. And thanks a lot for coming in, and such a wonderful time we had.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for embarrassing me. But I'm glad that there were all these pieces that resonated. And it was great to chat and talk about cricket and fun and everything else. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sidvee.
Thank you, Sidvee.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay, and that's us signing off. Very quickly, like, share, subscribe, do the usual stuff with the podcast. And more importantly, follow us on Twitter, because we now have a Twitter account. It's BNP_cricket, stands for Bits and Pieces. And we'll be back next week. And this time, I think we'll be back with cricket. We'll be back with maybe another guest. It'll also be fun. So yes, bye, tata, see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Done.